Skora wondered which species the Crayon Empire would genocide next, as the angry humans tended to call it the young Meridian, sat in his living pod, eyes riveted on the hollow display broadcasting the latest news. The ruthless Crayon Empire, led by the cruel Emperor Zorx, had conquered yet another planet. Enslaving its inhabitants, Skora's stomach churned as images of cracks and soldiers rounding up terrified civilians flashed across the screen. Iridia Prime, Skora's home world, teetered on the front lines of the war between the Galactic Confederation and the Crayon. The Confederation had promised reinforcements to protect the vulnerable planet, but as Skora watched, a grim-faced official announced they could not spare any ships. They had abandoned Iridia Prime to its fate. Skora's father, a high-ranking Iridian military officer, slammed his fist on the table, his voice shaking with rage at the betrayal. He vowed to fight to the last to defend their world, but Skora saw the fear in his eyes, the slump of his shoulders. What hope did they have against the might of the Crayon war machine as despair threatened to engulf him? Skora remembered whispers he'd heard about another species, one not part of the Confederation, a young race called humans from a distant planet named Earth. Rumors spoke of their fierceness in battle, their refusal to back down from a fight. Some even called them savages. But as Skora huddled in his pod watching his world's doom unfold on the hollow display, he couldn't help but wonder, would these angry, savage humans be Iridia Prime's only hope, or would they too turn their backs, leaving the Aryans to face the Crown alone? With each passing moment, the Crayon fleet drew closer, and time ran out for Skora's people. They needed a miracle. They needed someone, anyone, to stand with them against the coming darkness. They needed the human. Skora's father strode into the living pod, his face grim. He wore his battle armor, the metal plates gleaming under the artificial light. Skora knew what that meant. It was time for his father to leave to join the fight against the Crayon. Son, come here, his father said, beckoning him over. I need to talk to you. Skora approached, his heart heavy. He didn't want his father to go, didn't want to face the possibility of losing him, but he knew it was his father's duty. His father's duty. His father placed a hand on Skora's shoulder, his grip firm. I received a transmission from an old friend, Zorx, a retired Confederation admiral. He told me something that might be our last hope. Skora's eyes widened. What is it? Zorx spoke of a species called humans. They were part of the Confederation long ago, but left after a conflict. They're known for their warriors and technology. Zorx thinks they could help us against the Crayon. Skora frowned. He had heard the rumors about the humans, the whispers of their savagery, but didn't they vow to never get involved in galactic affairs again? His father nodded. They did, but Zorx believes they might make an exception for us. He wants me to send an envoy to their home system, Solaris, to ask for their help. Skora's mind raged. It was a desperate plan, but what choice did they have? The Confederation had abandoned them. The Kraken were coming. His father squeezed his shoulder. I want you to go, Skora. I want you to go, Skora. I want you to be that envoy. Skora's mouth fell open. Me, but I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a warrior. I'm just a kid. You're my son, his father said, his voice fierce. I trust you more than anyone. I know you can do this. Skora swallowed hard. He was afraid, more afraid than he had ever been, but he saw the faith in his father's eyes, the desperate hope he knew he couldn't refuse. I'll do it, Skora said, his voice shaking only a little. I'll go to Solaris. I'll find the humans. His father pulled him into a tight embrace. I'm proud of you, son. So proud. Skora hugged him back, fighting back tears. Then he stepped back, squaring his shoulders. I won't let you down, father. I won't let our people down. His father nodded, a small smile on his face. I know you won't. Skora turned and strode out of the living pod, heading for the spaceport. He had a small, fast ship waiting for him, one that could slip past the Crayon blockade. He had a message from his father, a plea for help, and he had the hopes of his people resting on his young shoulders as he set out into the stars towards a distant planet called Earth and a mysterious species known as humans. A score of small ship approached Solaris. A blinding blue light engulfed his vessel. The ship shuddered and groaned as an unseen force latched onto it, dragging it towards a massive structure orbiting the planet. Skora's heart raced as he realized he was caught in a tractor beam. His ship, helpless in its grasp, he gripped the controls, his knuckles pale, as he was pulled towards what appeared to be a heavily fortified space station. The young Iridian mind whirled with fear and doubt. Had he fallen into an app? Were the humans as hostile as the rumors suggested? As his ship was drawn into a cavernous docking bay, Skora saw a row of sleek, menacing warships lined up like predators waiting to strike. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry. The ship shooted to a halt, and Skora heard the clank of heavy boots on metal. A group of human soldiers clad in black armor and carrying pulse rifles surrounded his vessel. Skora's eyes widened as he took in their towering frames and rippling muscles, so different from the lithe Iridian. The soldiers yanked Skora from his ship, their grip firm, but not brutal. They marched him through the space station's dark corridors, their faces impassive behind dark visors. Skora's heart hammered in his chest as he was shoved into a small bare cell. The door slammed shut behind him with a clang that echoed in his bones. Skora paced the cell, his mind racing. He had to make the humans understand. had to convince them to help his people, but would they even listen? The cell door hissed open, and a tall, broad-shouldered human strode in his face was stern, his jaw set, and his eyes pierced Scorer like lasers. The human removed his helmet, revealing close-cropped gray hair and a face etched with lines of authority. "I am Captain Grayson," the human said, his voice deep and commanding. "You have entered human space without permission. Explain yourself." Scorer straightened, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "I am Scorer, son of Commander Zoran of Iridia Prime. I come seeking your help." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "The Confederation wars are not our concern. We left your squabbles behind long ago." Scorer's heart sank, but he pressed on. "The Crayon are not just the Confederation's enemy. They are a threat to all life in the galaxy. They have conquered countless worlds, enslaved entire species. They revel in genocide and destruction." Grayson's face remained impassive. "And why should this matter to us? We have our own concerns." Scorer's voice shook with emotion as he spoke. "The Confederation has abandoned us. They promised to protect Iridia Prime, but now they have left us to face the Crayon alone. We are defenseless against their onslaught. Without help, my people will be slaughtered or enslaved." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small data chip. "This is a message from my father, Commander Zoran. He asks for your help in the name of the friendship that once existed between our peoples. Please at least listen to his words." Grayson took the chip, turning it over in his fingers. His expression was unreadable. "I will relay this to my superiors," he said finally, "but do not get your hopes up, Iridian. We are not in the habit of fighting other species battles." With that, he turned and strode out of the cell, leaving Scorer alone with his fear and his fading hope. The young Iridian slumped against the wall, his heart heavy. He had delivered his message, but would it be enough? Would the humans answer his people's desperate plea, or would they turn their backs? Just as the Confederation had, only time would tell, and time was running out for Iridia Prime. Scorer sat on the hard bench in his cell, head in his hands. Hours had crawled by since Captain Grayson left with his father's message. The weight of his mission pressed down on his shoulders. If the humans refused to help his people, were doomed. The Crayon would slaughter them all. Despair threatened to swallow him. The cell door hissed open. Scorer's head snapped up. Captain Grayson strode in his face, unreadable. Behind him came an older human, tall and broad, with a neatly trimmed beard streaked with silver. The man's uniform was adorned with a dazzling array of medals that glinted under the harsh light. Scorer scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. Grayson stepped aside, allowing the older human to approach. The man's eyes, are piercing blue, fixed on Scorer. "I am Admiral Stark, commander of the human fleet," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "I have reviewed your father's message and discussed it with my staff." Scorer swallowed hard, mouth dry, and he managed to croak out. Stark clasped his hands behind his back. "We have decided to help your people, the Aryans, but make no mistake, we do this not out of any affection for the Confederation. They made their bed when they betrayed you." Relief crashed over Scorer like a wave. His knees felt weak. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." Stark held up a hand. "Don't thank us. Yet we have been watching the Crayon, tracking their movements. Their brutality and disregard for life have not gone unnoticed. If they are not stopped, they will threaten every civilization in the galaxy, including Earth." Scorer nodded, understanding dawning. The humans were acting in their own self-interest, but right now he didn't care about their reasons. All that mattered was that they were willing to fight. "I will send a fleet of our most advanced warships to assist in the defense of Iridia Prime," Stark continued, "but I have a condition. Your people must share any intelligence you have on the Kraken's tactics and technology. We need to know what we're up against." "Of course," Scorer said. "Without hesitation, I'll make sure you get everything we have." Stark nodded, satisfied. "Good, Captain Grayson. We'll escort you to your ship. You are free to go." As Scorer followed Grayson out of the cell, his heart soared with hope. The humans were coming. His people had a chance, but Admiral Stark's parting words echoed in his mind. One more thing, the Admiral had said, his gaze intense. "Our involvement must be kept secret from the Confederation. We have no desire to be drawn back into galactic politics. As far as they know, you came here and left empty-handed." Understood. Scorer had agreed, knowing the risks of defying the humans. As he prepared his ship for the journey home, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Kraken would not be easily defeated, and the humans' price for their aid might be higher than anyone realized. But for now, all that mattered was getting the news to his father and his people. The humans were coming. Iridia Prime would not stand alone. Scorer's ship dropped out of hyperspace, the blue-green orb of Iridia Prime filling his view screen. But instead of the peaceful world he had left, he saw the flashes of orbital bombardment and the wreckage of destroyed ships drifting in space. The Crayon had arrived. He punched his thrusters to full, racing towards the planet's surface. As he entered the atmosphere, the signs of battle became clearer. Smoke rose from burning cities, and the thunder of distant explosions echoed through the air. Scorer landed at the capital spaceport. Leaping from his ship, before the ramp had fully extended, he sprinted towards the command center, his heart pounding inside. He found Chaos officers shouted orders over the din of alarms, and the holographic display showed the crack on forces advancing on all fronts. In the center of the room, the Iridian High Council argued heatedly. Some advocated for surrender, saying it was the only way to save lives. Others, including Scora's father, insisted they fight to the last, but Scora could see the despair in their eyes. They knew they were outmatched. Father Scora called out, pushing his way through the crowd. His father turned, his face etched with weariness and pain. Scora saw the bandages wrapped around his torso, stained with blood. Scora, what are you doing here? I thought the humans are coming. Scora interrupted, his voice ringing out over the noise. They've agreed to help us. The room fell silent. The counselors stared at Scora in disbelief. The humans, one asked, but they swore never to get involved in our wars again. They've changed their minds. Scora said they're on their way now with a fleet of warships. We just have to hold out until they arrive. His father's eyes shone with renewed hope. He turned to the others. You heard my son, we're not alone in this fight. We just have to hold the line a little longer. As if on cue, a new alarm blared. Incoming ships detected. An officer shouted, they're not Kraken, they're human. On the display, a fleet of sleek angular ships dropped out of hyperspace near Iridia Prime. They moved with a grace and precision that put the Confederation ships to shame. At their head was a massive dread in its hull, emblazoned with the letters USS Titan. The human ships plunged into the fray, their weapons blazing. The Crayon, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, but the humans fought with a ferocity and unpredictability that threw the Crayon into disarray. Their ships danced around the Crayon battle cruisers, pummeling them with missile bears and energy beams. Scora watched as the tide of battle shifted. The Crayon, so used to the staid tactics of the Confederation, couldn't adapt to the humans' unorthodox style. Their formation broke. Ships, scattering in panic. A cheer went up in the command center. For the first time since the invasion began, there was hope. Scora's father clasped his shoulder. You did it, son. You brought us the miracle we needed. Scora shook his head. It's not over yet. We still have to drive them back. He turned and ran back to his ship. As he took off, he saw Iridian fighters rallying around the human ships, their spirits renewed. He joined their formation, his heart swelling with pride and determination. Together, they dove into the battle, the fate of Iridia Prime hanging in the balance. Scora knew the fight was far from over, but with the humans by their side, they had a chance, and he would make sure that chance wasn't wasted. The throne room shook as Emperor Zorak slammed his fist on the armrest of his obsidian throne. The metal bent under the force of the blow. His advisors cowered, none daring to meet his furious gaze. How did this happen? Zorax roared. How did the humans even know about our invasion plans? The advisors glanced at each other nervously. Finally, one stepped forward, his head bowed. Your Majesty, our intelligence suggests the humans have been spying on us for years. They used advanced stealth tech to hack our systems and eavesdrop on our comms. Orcs, his eyes narrowed. And how did they accomplish such a feat without us noticing? Another advisor spoke up, his voice trembling. We believe they had help from within, Your Majesty, a traitor in our midst, who Dox demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The advisor swallowed hard. General Zalo, sire, we have evidence he's been feeding the humans information, including details of the Iridia Prime invasion. Zorax went still, a vein pulsing in his temple. Zalo, one of his most trusted generals, a traitor. The thought filled him with a cold, seething rage. Bring him to me, he said, his voice deceptively calm. I want to look into his eyes. As he died, the advisors bowed and scurried out. Minutes later, a squad of cracks on guards dragged a battered Zoth before the throne. The general lifted his head, meeting Zorg's gaze with defiance. Why Exoth? Zorg asked. Why betray your own kind? Zeoth spat blood on the polished floor. I grew tired of your brutality, your endless hunger for conquest. The humans offered a better way. Zor's face contorted with fury. He rose from his throne, drawing his plasma blade, the weapon hewn to life, casting a sickly green glow. Your way leads to extinction. Zorak snarled with a roar. He swung the blade, separating Zolo's head from his shoulders. The general's body crumpled, blood pooling on the floor. Zorak turned to his remaining advisors, his eyes blazing. Recall all our forces, prepare for a counterattack. We will crush the humans and the Iridian beneath our heel. The advisors nodded, not daring to question. Zorax wasn't finished. And tell the scientists to work faster on the new weapon. I want it ready to unleash hell on our enemies. Will see how the humans like a taste of their own medicine. As the advisor scurried to carry out his orders, Zorak sat back on his throne, seething. The humans had caught him by surprise. This time it would not happen again. He would make them pay for their interference, and the Iridian would be the first to feel his wrath. The sky over Iridia Prime glowed. An angry orange smoke billowed from the ruins of shattered cities, craters pockmarked the once lush landscape. The combined Hum and Iridian fleet hung in low orbit, their hulls scorched and battered from the ferocious battle against the Kraken invaders. On the bridge of the USS Titan, Admiral Stark stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the view screen. Beside him, Commander Zoran, Scora's father, leaned heavily on a crutch, his face etched with pain and exhaustion. We've driven them back for now, Stark said, his voice grim. But the cost? Zoran nodded, his eyes haunted. So many lives lost, and for what? The Crayon Will return with even greater numbers. A communications officer called out from her station. Admiral, we're receiving a distress call from the Iridian colony on Zephyr I are under attack by a new Kraken fleet. Stark frowned. Zephyr Thur. That's where the Aryans have their advanced research facility. Isn't it? Zoran's eyes widened. Yes, the scientists there were working on a secret project, something that could change the course of the war. Stark turned to face him. What kind of project? Zoran hesitated, then lowered his voice. A new type of weapon, one that harnesses the power of dark energy, but it's still experimental and highly unstable. Stark's jaw tightened. He knew the dangers of rushing untested technology into battle, but if the Crayon got their hands on this weapon first, he made his decision. We have to protect the colony. Commander, I'm splitting the fleet. I'll take the Titan and half our ships to Zephyr I-3. You stay here with the rest and guard Iridia Prime. Zoran looked like he wanted to argue, but a sharp pain from his injuries made him wince. He nodded reluctantly. Stark turned to the communications officer. Send a message to the Iridian command. We need their fastest ship and a team of their best special forces. As the officer relayed the message, Skora stepped onto the bridge. The young Iridian had proved himself in the battle, fighting with a skill and bravery that belied his years. I volunteered to lead the special forces team. Admiral, Skora said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. We can infiltrate the Kraken command ship, find out what they're planning. Stark studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well, but be careful. We don't know what you'll find on that ship. As Skora left to prepare his team, another message came through on the comm. Stark's face darkened as he listened. The Confederation, he said to Zur. They know we're here, and they're demanding answers. Zoran closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging. We knew this day would come, but we don't have time for their politics, not with the Kraken at our doorstep. Stark expression hardened. Agreed, I'll deal with the Confederation. You focus on keeping Iridia Prime safe. He turned to his crew. Prepare for jump to Zephyr I-3 and send a message to Earth. Tell them we might need reinforcements. As the Titan and its escort fleet disappeared into the swirling vortex of a hyperspace jump, Skora and his team boarded their own ship. The sleek Iridian craft was built for speed and stealth, perfect for the dangerous mission ahead. Skora sat in the pilot seat, his hands trembling slightly. As he gripped the controls, he thought of his father, of the trust Admiral Stark had placed in him. He couldn't let them down. Ready? He asked his team. They nodded, their faces set with determination. Skora took a deep breath and punched the thrusters. The ship leapt forward, streaking towards the distant speck of the Crayon command vessel, towards destiny. Skora's heart pounded as he crept through the dimly lit corridors of the Crayon command ship, his stolen armor clanking softly with each step. His team followed close behind, their weapons at the ready. The access codes provided by the late General Zalo had gotten them this far, but Skora knew their luck could run out at any moment. As they approached the ship's central control room, Skora held up a hand signaling his team to stop. He peered around the corner and saw two cracks and guards standing in front of a massive reinforced door. Skora turned to his team and nodded. They knew what to do. In a flash, they burst around the corner, their weapons blazing. The guards fell before they could even raise their own rifles. Skora rushed to the door and punched in the stolen access code. The door hissed open, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with blinking consoles and holographic displays. In the center of the room stood a towering structure pulsing with an eerie blue light. Skora approached it cautiously, his eyes widening as he realized what it was. The Doomsday Cannon. He breathed. One of his team members, a skilled hacker named Varro, rushed to nearby console and began tapping furiously at the keys. I'm in, he said, after a moment downloading the plans. Now suddenly an alarm blared throughout the ship. Intruder alert, a robotic voice announced. All security forces to the central control room. Skora cursed under his breath. We've been discovered. Varro, how much longer? They almost there, Varro replied, his fingers flying over the console. Just a few more seconds. The sound of pounding footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Skora and his team took up defensive positions around the room, their weapons trained on the door. Got it, Varro shouted, yanking a data chip from the console. The plans are ours. At that moment, the door exploded inward and a squad of heavily armed Crayon soldiers poured into the room. Skora and his team opened fire, the air filled with the deafening sound of energy weapons and the AC smell of ozone. Skora ducked behind a console as a barrage of laser fire scorched the wall behind him. He popped up and squeezed off a few shots, taking down a crack on soldier, but more kept coming there. Numbers, seemingly endless fallback. Skora yelled over the D of battle. We have what we came for. His team began a fighting retreat, leapfrogging from cover to cover as they made their way towards the exit, but the Crayon were relentless, pressing forward with a savage determination. Skora saw Varro go down a smoking hole in his chest. He gritted his teeth and kept firing, his heart aching for his fallen comrade. They had to make it out, had to get the plans back to Admiral Stark. As they neared the hangar bay, where their stolen cracks and ship awaited, a massive explosion rocked the corridor. Skora was Thrown off his feet, his head slamming against the wall, dazed, he looked up to see a wall of fire separating him from the rest of his team. "Go," he shouted, waving them on "get the plans" to the admiral. His team hesitated for a moment, then turned and ran, disappearing into the smoke. Skora pushed himself too. His feet, his armor scorched and dented. He could hear the crayon closing in behind him, their voices growing louder. He stumbled into the hangar bay, his vision blurry. He saw his team's ship already lifting off the deck, its engines roaring. They had made it. The plans were safe, but Skora was cut off. The crayon hot on his heels, he spotted a row of escape pods along the wall and sprinted towards them, laser bolts sizzling past his head. He dove into the nearest pod, slamming the hatch shut behind him. His hands shaking, he punched the launch sequence and felt the pod shudder as it blasted free of the command ship as the pod tumbled through space. Skora slumped back in his seat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. The plans were safe, but at what cost? Light years away, Admiral Stark stood on the bridge of the USS Titan, his face grim as he watched the Iridian colony burn on the view screen. The cracks and ambush had been devastating, catching the human fleet off guard and destroying the colony's vital research facility. But just before the facility was lost, a transmission had come through on a secure channel. It was from the lead scientist, a brilliant Iridian named Dr. Zoran. Admiral Stark Zoran's voice had crackled over the comm, the sound of explosions and screams in the background. "We did it. We found a way to stop the doomsday cannon." Stark had leaned forward in his chair, his heart racing. "What is it, Doctor?" "An EMP device, specifically designed to target the cannon's Nexium power core. It will render the weapon inoperable." Stark had felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the reality of their situation. "But the crayon control the cannon. How do we get close enough to use the EMP?" "That's the problem," Zoran had said, his voice strained. "The device has a limited range. You'll need to find a way to get it within striking distance of the cannon." The transmission had cut off, then the signal lost as the research facility was destroyed. Stark had sat back in his chair, his mind racing. They had a way to stop the doomsday cannon, but deploying it would be a suicide mission. They would need to get a ship close enough to the cannon to use the EMP, and that would mean flying straight into the heart of the Kraken fleet. Stark closed his eyes, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. He knew what he had to do. He just hoped that Skora and his team had succeeded in their mission. Without the plans to the cannon, they would be flying blind. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and time was running out. The Kraken would not hesitate to use their new weapon, and if they did, countless worlds would burn. Stark knew that he would have to act fast, and he would have to be willing to sacrifice everything to stop. Then he took a deep breath and opened his eyes, his gaze hard with determination. "Helm," he said, his voice steady. "Set a course for the Kraken homeworld. We're going to end this once and for all." Skora drifted in the void of space, his escape pod tumbling end over end. He had barely escaped the Kraken command ship with his life. His thoughts raced as he wondered about the fate of his team. Had they made it out with the stolen plans? A bright light flooded the interior of the pod. Skora squinted, trying to make out the source. A human ship loomed into view, its hull marked with the distinctive emblem of the Terran Union. A wave of relief washed over Skora as the larger vessel locked onto his pod with a tractor beam pulling him to safety. Once aboard, Skora found himself face to face with Admiral Stark and his father, Commander Zoran. He wasted no time in revealing the stolen plans for the doomsday cannon. As the schematics flashed across the screen, the two leaders grew increasingly alarmed by the stars. Admiral Stark muttered, his brow furrowed. "The destructive potential of this weapon is beyond anything we've ever seen." Commander Zoran nodded grimly. "If the crayon complete its construction, they could wipe out entire planets with a single shot." Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent transmission from Iridia Prime. The Confederation had dispatched a fleet demanding that the humans withdraw immediately and leave the Aryans to fend for themselves. Admiral Stark's jaw tightened. He paced the room deep in thought. Finally, he turned to face Commander Zoran. "I won't abandon your people," he declared. "We started this fight together, and we'll see it through to the end." Skora felt a surge of respect for the human admiral. He knew the decision to defy the Confederation could have dire consequences, but Stark's resolve never wavered. The admiral gathered his officers and laid out a daring plan. A small infiltration team, led by Skora and Captain Grayson, would slip past the cracks in defenses and sabotage the doomsday cannon. Meanwhile, the main human and Iridian fleets would engage the Kraken armada, drawing their attention away from the strike team. Skora and Grayson's team boarded a sleek stealth-equipped vessel and set out for the crayon-controlled system. Using the stolen access codes, they managed to slip past the enemy's perimeter defenses undetected. As they approached the massive construction site of the doomsday cannon, Skora's heart raced. The weapon was even more terrifying in person, its colossal barrel pointing ominously into space. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. The crayon had detected their presence and launched a fierce counterattack. Grayson's ship weaved and dodged, barely evading the incoming fire. "We need to get closer," Skora shouted over the D of Battle Grayson gritted his teeth, pushing the engines to their limit. Skora held on tight as the ship kenned towards the doomsday cannon. A barrage of cracks and laser fire slammed into the ship's hull, causing it to shudder violently. Grayson's face was illuminated by the flashing warning lights on the console. "We can't take much more of this," he yelled. "Skora, you need to deploy the EMP device now." Skora hesitated, realizing that Grayson's ship was too badly damaged to make it back. The captain met his gaze, a look of grim determination in his eyes. "Go," Grayson urged. "I'll buy you the time you need." With a heavy heart, Skora nodded. He grabbed the EMP device and sprinted towards the airlock. As he launched himself towards the doomsday cannon, he saw Grayson's ship veer away, drawing the cracks on fire. Using his knowledge of the cannon's design, Skora located the Nexium power core. He planted the EMP device, his hand shaking as he set the timer. With seconds to spare, he pushed off from the cannon, propelling himself into space. Behind him, the EMP device detonated. In a blinding flash, a massive shock wave rippled outward, engulfing the doomsday cannon. Skora watched in awe as the weapon crumbled, its structure disintegrating under the force of the blast. The nearby cracks and ships, caught in the EM's radius, drifted lifelessly, their systems fried. Skora felt a surge of triumph, tempered by the knowledge of Grayson's sacrifice. As he floated in space, waiting for the human fleet to retrieve him, Skora knew that the battle was far from over. The Crayon would not take this defeat lightly, but for now, they had struck a decisive blow, and the galaxy had a fighting chance. As the wreckage of the doomsday cannon drifted in space, cheers erupted from the human and Iridian ships. The Kraken fleet, now leaderless and scattered, began to retreat. Skora, exhausted but triumphant, made his way back to the USS Titan, where Admiral Stark greeted him with a firm handshake and a weary smile. "Who did it, son?" Stark said. "You saved us all." Skora shook his head. "We did it, Admiral, together." Their celebration was cut short by an urgent transmission from Iridia Prime. Skora's heart sank as he listened to the panicked voice of his mother, barely audible over the sounds of chaos in the background. "Skora, your father, Indo, he's sick. Everyone's sick. The Kraken, they released something, a virus. It's spreading fast. We need help." Admiral Stark's face grew grim. As he listened to the transmission, he turned to his medical officer, Dr. Chen, who was already analyzing the data from Iridia Prime. "It's a bioweapon," Dr. Chen said, her voice shaking. "Highly contagious, lethal. We've never seen anything like it." Skora felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "I have to go back. My people need me." Stark nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'll send a team, all of our best medics and scientists with you. We'll do everything we can to help." As Skora prepared to depart, a message came through from the Confederation. They demanded that the humans withdraw immediately, threatening to cut all ties with Earth if they continued to assist the Iridians. Stark's jaw tightened. He looked at Skora, then back at the message. "We won't abandon your people," he said firmly, "but I can't risk an all-out war with the Confederation. Not now." Skora nodded, understanding the difficult position Stark was in. "I'll go alone, then my people will find a way. We always have." He boarded a small ship and set a course for Iridia Prime, his heart heavy with worry for his father and his people. When he arrived, the once vibrant capital city was in ruins. The streets were empty save for the bodies of the sick and dying. Skora raced to his family's home, where he found his mother weeping over his father's lifeless form. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes red with tears. "He fought so hard, but the virus, it was too